she was involved in developing the Pilot Knowledge Alliances project in the DG, the European Commission, and part of the team that developed the successful guiding framework for entrepreneurial higher education institutions. Now, the Commission, from my point of view, the new Commission, will continue this effort of creating new instruments to support this interaction between academia and business. The European Institute of Technology is also part of the unit of the same direction general. New organigram will come very soon, but anyway, this is part of the dynamic life of the European Commission. Well, thank you very much, Juliet, to stay here, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Professor Leon. So it's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm especially glad to also be speaking after Mr. Arzeni, because as he said at the end of his speech, the European Commission and the OECD, we've come together to develop a tool which is designed to help universities and higher education institutions on their road to change, to become a more entrepreneurial university. So it's a nice bookend to have the both of us here today, I think. Please, no questions on the new commission. It's only just happened, and as was mentioned, we aren't sure yet how things are going to be structured in the coming weeks. It's interesting times for everyone at the moment. But we are confident that we will be going on with the work that we're doing, especially on entrepreneurial higher education. Now, I don't know about you, but I sometimes get a little bit tired of the terms entrepreneurial and entrepreneurship. I think when you work in policy development, in higher education, in the employment sector, these are words that we hear over and over again. They've become part of our everyday vocabulary, and we're seeing them pinned onto things, sort of fixed to all kinds of different activities and institutions, usually a way of sort of implying quality, extra value. So I think we need to reappropriate these terms a little bit for what they really are in the context that we're talking about, which is higher education, innovation, and ultimately development in our societies and economic renewal as well. So really what we mean is the ability to recognize opportunities and to act upon them using resources in an innovative way that creates value. And that can be applied to institutions as well as to individuals. And I think that's another thing that's very important to think of, is that entrepreneurship can drive change and innovation, but it's driven by, ultimately, individuals. And that's something that we need to recognize. It's not about big institutions, big ministries and public bodies. It's really about the individuals in those public bodies, in those administrations. But there needs to be support from the top. And that's what we're going to talk about a bit today, is how this can be supported, how this can be generated. And so the bottom line is, if we want to see an improvement in our economies, we want to see a greater diversity, more job opportunities. I'm not going to go into the whole employment issue, and Sergio already mentioned that a little. But generally, we need a more sustainable, a more innovative future in Europe. And if we want to do that, we really need to develop a more entrepreneurial culture across the board. It's about entrepreneurial citizens as well. And it's what, I mean, again, this is something that was mentioned, but this fact about SMEs being the drivers of employment in Europe. This is something we keep saying. It keeps coming up. The statistics change slightly. My statistics say that it's 85% of SMEs that are the job creators. And apparently there are 4 million jobs created every year by new businesses in Europe. This is huge. But the barriers to creating a startup, the barriers for young entrepreneurs or middle-aged or elderly entrepreneurs, but to having their own business, to being independent, or indépendant, as you say in France and Belgium, are notorious. And in many cases, in many European countries, they send people just fleeing across the border, and I don't mean just for tax reasons, but genuinely because they simply cannot do this in their own member states. And as Professor Leon mentioned, I spent several years in the private sector in London, and I was amazed at the number of French people in their late 20s and early 30s who'd come to London to set up businesses, because they all said the same thing, that it simply wasn't possible to do this in France. Which is tragic, especially given that the word entrepreneur comes from the French, which it's a little of a shame, although that brings me to the famous George Bush quote, which is, what is the French for entrepreneur? But that's not what we're here for today. So, part of any strategy to foster a more sustainable entrepreneurial culture should first and foremost be a change in the way that entrepreneurial people are perceived. I think that's very important. There should be far broader understanding of what it is to be an entrepreneurial person. And this isn't just about creating business. If we all start setting up businesses, society is going to collapse. This is not the point. It's about encouraging certain skills and aptitudes in people. And what we need, it's about thinking creatively and acting accordingly, I think. It really is. Whatever you're doing, wherever you are. I mean, we also talk about intrapreneurs, so people who are already in work, who are already in companies. And those people are vital too. It's on enterprising individuals. In English, we say someone's enterprising. It doesn't mean they have a business. It just means that they have a way of thinking and acting and behaving, which is enterprising. One of the EU objectives for 2020, and I'm sorry that there's not going to be a workshop on EU 2020 and Erasmus+. You can ask me a few questions on that, but it's not my area of expertise. But one of the EU objectives for 2020 is to have 40% of secondary school leavers have a higher further education degree or diploma by 2020. Now, this is a vast percentage of the population. I mean, there are pros and cons to this, and I think some people might agree, disagree with this objective, and I won't go into that. But what it is a massification of education. Again, Sergio made a reference to this in his speech, but we are having a massification of education on an unprecedented scale. And this has its good points and bad points. One of the impacts of this is that there is less time to spend on developing the individual skills and abilities of people. We are moving towards we're having cohorts of hundreds and hundreds of students within 1 year. And so in order for a university, if it wants to be a center of excellence and of knowledge, if it wants to rise above the rest, it's going to have something extra. It is going to have to go that extra mile if it wants to have an output that is valuable. So part of that is this idea of becoming an entrepreneurial university. I mean, obviously, higher education institutions are ideally placed to encourage this change, to encourage this more entrepreneurial citizen. And this is something that is crucial to future graduates. They're going to need this to compete and be successful in what we know to be this increasingly competitive global economy. Again, this has been mentioned as well. But just 30 years ago, it wouldn't have occurred to us that we would be competing with universities in China or Indonesia or even maybe 40 years ago, Australia. So this is a real change for us because we have rested a little bit on our laurels, and we're quite arrogant in Europe when it comes to our attitude towards other countries, especially, okay, this is controversial, but former colonies, say. I'm speaking as a Brit. But we tend to think a bit, well, we have the best universities, we have the culture, we have the history. Well, that's all very well and good, but that's not going to ultimately put food on our plates if we don't change the way that we maximize the potential of that culture and that history. So this brings me to, I mean, that's the theory, okay, so what about the practice? So what is this entrepreneurial university? I'm going to use a working definition by Alan Gibb that most of you are probably familiar with, and he states that an entrepreneurial higher education institution should empower students and staff to demonstrate enterprise, innovation, and creativity, that its activities are directed to enhance learning, knowledge, production, and exchange in a highly complex and changing societal environment. And finally, that as an organization, it's dedicated to creating public value via processes of open engagement. All right, I think that's not too much jargon, relatively speaking. But for me, the overarching point here is that it's the institution as a whole that has to become entrepreneurial. It's not just about the faculty, it's not just about teaching, having, teaching entrepreneurship, which already, again, that's another debate. How do you teach entrepreneurship? But having a course somewhere in the curriculum saying this is entrepreneurship. No, it's about a general change in attitude. It's about how you teach. It's about what kind of staff you employ. How is that staff engaged in an entrepreneurial process? Are there incentives for staff to be engaged? Is there an entrepreneurial mission or strategy? And if there is one, is it actually implemented, or is it just sitting in a book somewhere and it's a PR tool when the university is looking for funding? So it's a much broader, much more systematic and systemic change that is needed. And again, this does not have to mean destroying our history, destroying what we have established in Europe through our universities, which are part of our cultural heritage and part of our richness, and also one of the reasons that people send their students from China, their children from China, from America, etc., so that they can have a stamp from Oxford or, you know, Salamanca and these very old, prestigious universities. So it is a very big part also of our cultural DNA, and we should build on that too. So being or becoming an entrepreneurial university is a response to this greater pressure, to this external pressure that we are having on our higher education system. And that's one of the reasons that this has been such a big part of the debate on educational reform that keeps going round and round like a hamster on a wheel sometimes in places like the European Commission. So, what do we do about it? How do we actually help institutions become more entrepreneurial? Well, this is a question that has been asked many, many times. And it came up once again at the 2011 European University Business Forum. For those of you who don't know about this, it's an event that happens every 2 years now, since 2008, which brings together people from academia and from the business sector, as well as any other people, so stakeholders with an interest in this, to discuss matters of higher education, of innovation, of change. And during this forum, there was a very strong demand for some kind of a framework, some kind of reference framework that would help guide institutions to change, that would help them diagnose what their problems, inverted commas, were, where the weaknesses lay, and how they could move on from there. So something like a roadmap for change. So no small ask. I mean, this was quite a challenge. And obviously, from the European Commission's point of view, there was a clear value in creating a European framework, something that would be common to Europe. So we convened an external panel of experts from 9 different member states, and we got involved with the OECD, because it turned out that the OECD were actually thinking they were working on something rather similar. And clearly, joining forces with an organization like the OECD could only enhance the quality and the value of this tool, which is what we did. So within, I think it was pretty fast, within two years, a year and a half, we came up with something that was now called HEInnovate. So this is a self-assessment tool, and that's where the strength of this approach lies. It is not a ranking or benchmarking tool that we, the OECD and the Commission, these two powerful bodies, impose upon anyone. Not at all. It's completely subjective. You complete it, the results are yours. We do not have access to your results. We do not use them for data collection. It's about your perception of your institution across a series of areas that we identified. Now, some of these may already be familiar to you. You may have already seen these on other assessment tools, or certainly in papers and literature on the Entrepreneurial University. We didn't pluck these from the ether. These are the result of hours and hours and hours of meetings and very, very bad European Commission coffee and darkened rooms. And this was the compromise. This is what we came up with as being really the most relevant aspects of an institution that wants to be entrepreneurial. So I hope a few of you have actually looked at HEInnovate. I know some of you here were in the workshop yesterday, and I certainly hope that you will all take a look at it after this conference. But what you will find is that each of these dimensions contains a set of statements, and you rate those statements according to how much you agree or disagree with the statement within the context of your particular institution or department, faculty, etc. You don't have to complete all of them. It's up to you. You pick what you're interested in, you take a look. You can use it as a group, so you can use it also to measure the internal perception of your institution. And that's very important, because you can see, as if you're in a position of authority, you're like, well, of course we have an entrepreneurial remit, it's in our mission statement, but you might send this to certain staff, to deans, and they go, we have not got a clue what you're talking about. So clearly, in there, that's a way of communicating internally. Your results are also saved, so if you do make changes, you can come back and re-evaluate again. And as I said, we are not evaluating this. These are your results, they're saved, they're private, we don't have access to them. So yes, another point is, of course, that this is very flexible. This can be used by any institution anywhere. It's not limited to Europe. It's already been used it's been accessed by 100 countries worldwide, so all the member states, but also obviously well beyond the member states. We've had quite a lot of interest from America, South Africa. So it's clearly responding to a need that goes well beyond the problems that we're having in Europe. So we've had a very busy year, as you can see, of events and promotion. I mean, this was launched in November of last year, so it's still really, it's a toddler. You have to be gentle with it. It's very young, and we're still developing it. We will always be developing it because it's a constant process. If something's entrepreneurial, it can never really be finished, polished, and that's it in the box. It's always going to be updated and continuously worked on. And during the development of the tool and the workshops that we've been holding this year, we've come to realize that the variety of perceptions of entrepreneurship are really staggering. And this has also been one of the challenges in developing something that's got to work at a European level, is how do you find a definition or an approach that's going to work in all the member states? I mean, the cultural diversity we have in Europe is one of our richnesses. It's fantastic. But it's also an absolute nightmare at a policy level if you're working at the level of the European Commission, because you don't want to, you can't say that, okay, your understanding of this is less good than your understanding of this. Absolutely not. And given the very, very varied approaches to higher education in different countries, this is another factor. In some countries, it's highly centralized. Therefore, the best way to encourage institutional change is to go through the ministries, is to go through the governments. In other countries, it's incredibly varied. You have, it's private, it's public, it's even business-led. So the best way to encourage change in those countries is at an institutional level. So this has been a real challenge, and it continues to be one. But it's also, again, we wouldn't change it for the world, because it's also one of our richnesses here. So, let me see. Yeah, so a little bit of what we've done, what we've got so far. You might see this and say, hang on, you said you didn't collect data. We don't collect data. We just know how many institutions have used the self-assessment. So more than 470 have actually completed the whole self-assessment. And as I said, more than 100 countries have accessed the tool, so either just looking at it or doing the self-assessments. Of course, I didn't mention this, but when you do complete this self-assessment, you get results which generate materials. And these materials we've developed in cooperation with the OECD. We continue to add to them. And you can download them, and they're completely free. So you download them as much as you like. We keep adding material. You can keep downloading it. There's no restrictions. So, and we will continue, of course, to do things in the year ahead. Because, as I said, if we want to remain relevant, we have to keep going. We can't stop. And this is very much something that was done at the demand of the higher education community. And we continue to work on that basis. The feedback we get from you is our #1 priority when it comes to rethinking what we are offering with this tool. So the next steps, as I said, nothing is ever really finished, but so we're going to have a couple of new versions, new releases of HEInnovate. And the first one will be in November of this year during the Global Entrepreneurship Week. So that's coming soon. We really want to build the HEInnovate community. We think that's very important, that we get a community of users and people who are interested in this concept and in the application of the tool. Because at the moment, what we're seeing is that as it's very much in its infancy, people are using the self-assessment, they get the results, and they think, okay, not bad, interesting, now what? And that was what was interesting in the workshop run by Thorsten yesterday, was this approach to okay, now we do a diagnosis, and now we work on a solution. We try to find a solution, and then we see if we can apply it, and then we re-diagnose, reassess using the tool X months down the line. I think that's a very useful approach to take. We've also put in place some policy support measures. We're going to have national policy reviews run by the OECD in 5 member states over the next 2 years. We are working on a quality assurance system for HEInnovate, and we are looking at also encouraging more cooperation between the users. Again, this idea of a community of users. And really, it's vital that we make top management aware of this tool, because we like to talk about bottom-up, grassroots, etc. Unfortunately, this is not one of those times. This has to come from the top. You cannot become an entrepreneurial university if you do not have an entrepreneurial strategy that is implemented from the top the hierarchy of the university. You can have fantastic people, and we all know people like that, who are very, very good, who are very creative, and who are dying because they are somewhere stuck in the basement of a university and they're not being listened to. So we're also looking to make a training package. We're also looking to make a training package which we will make available to people who are interested in holding workshops in their own institutions. So I think that would be a great added value, that you no longer need to have to organize something on a larger scale or with the Commission or with the OECD, but you can do this yourselves. And something very important, we're going to launch the HEInnovate Challenge on the 19th of November. And what this is it's a call for papers, not really papers, but stories. They're going to be very, very short. Stories of your experiences, things that you've done in your institutions which are around any one of those 7 dimensions. So it can be in impact, it can be in leadership, it can be in staffing, incentives, teaching, learning, etc. And they're stories of success or bad experiences too. I mean, you might not want to send in bad experiences, but that's actually very interesting to see what hasn't worked and what has worked. So there'll be a lot more information about that on our site in the coming weeks. So I think that's more or less it. I mean, I'd like to finish just, however, with a couple more points. I know that most of you here today, you come from institutions that have already attained a certain level of excellence in research, in teaching, in entrepreneurial networks, in university business cooperation. But nevertheless, I would ask you to think about the following points when you leave here today or when you're discussing amongst yourselves. What would you like to see change in your institution? And there must be something, nobody's perfect. And can you be a part of that change process? And if not you, do you know who can? Who's the one who can lead this? And can you go and talk to them? Can you help them with this? And do you know if your institution has an entrepreneurial policy? Is there a mission somewhere central to the university? And if so, is it just a PR document or is it applied? And if it is applied, does the rest of the university know about it? Are the staff aware of it? And what are they doing about it? So I know that I'm all that stands between you and the coffee break, so I'm going to leave it there. And I hope that this has given you some food for thought. I really hope that you will take a look at HEInnovate, and we really, really welcome your feedback and comments. Thank you.
Sometimes universities like to organize everything related to entrepreneurship in an isolated way.
Yes.
It seems that it's just an internal structure, etc. But from your experience also launching in the Commission all the kinds of initiatives like knowledge and innovation communities or the knowledge alliances, things like that, that try to merge together the interests from both sides in order to speed up this entrepreneurship process. What is from your opinion, the best approach that universities could do in order to drive the process of entrepreneurship? Just to have a set of partners for that, or just before that to create an internal cultural change before starting to working with others?
Well, how do you go about creating an internal cultural change? I mean, yeah, as you said, I didn't really mention, but there are various other initiatives that the Commission has undertaken and promoted in the last few years to support university business cooperation, which I think is going to be talked about a bit this afternoon. And amongst those, the knowledge alliances and many other also types of cooperative alliances for vocational training, etc. And that has been, I think, that was our first step towards encouraging a cultural change within institutions, was to open them up to see that by working with businesses, this was not about sort of, I think often some academics can be a bit entrenched, it's not about selling out. It wasn't about, money being a dirty thing and should not be associated with knowledge. It was about really having a knowledge exchange that would bring added value to both sectors. And what we're seeing is that those institutions that have taken that up and that are really running with it and have been doing it in some cases for 20 years, so well before this has become something in public policy at the European level, they have changed their culture within their institutions. They are seeing, they're thinking in a much broader sense, and they're also seeing the value that this type of cooperation brings to their environment, because universities are very, very embedded in their environment. They have a very big impact on the region around them, on the society around them. So how to bring about this cultural change? Well, I think it's looking at what's around you, maximizing the value of the people you work with, the structures around you. And then to drive this entrepreneurship, I think very much going to events like this, talking to other people. I think it's what you were saying, or Sergio was saying, about the value of talking with other people. It's not all just about social networking. It's about seeing things for yourself. It's about hearing about case studies, getting examples, trying things out, and not being entrepreneurial, not being afraid of failure, and daring to go to your management and say, look, a change is needed. I can suggest the following. We can do some dry runs. We can try this out. I think there's no one solution, but I do think that being a bit brave, a little bit creative about it, and really learning from each other and not sitting in a corner going, yeah, but this is mine, I don't want to share it, I think that's really important. Sorry, I don't know if that really answers your question.
Thank you very much.